My girlfriend's unforgettable first love had just gotten divorced. Without a second thought, she broke up with me. The reason? Patrick, her unforgettable first love, had been cheated on. She didn't even care about my dignity. She went so far as to post on her social media, writing, "I wish I could go back 8 years and stop Patrick from marrying that awful woman." What I didn't expect was for her wish to come true. We both traveled back in time, 8 years into the past. I decided to grant her wish and let her and Patrick be together. But who could have guessed that Patrick would eventually send her into someone else's bed? Chapter 1. When I saw Susanna's post on social media, I had just completed an 8-hour surgery on a patient. On the way back to my office, I fainted in the corridor due to exhaustion. The next time I opened my eyes, I found myself in a dimly lit booth. Flashing colorful lights danced erratically, and the booming music was deafening. Someone tapped my shoulder and exclaimed, "Alex, you're such a lightweight. One drink, and you're out." Through the haze, my vision slowly focused, and I recognized the person in front of me. It was Patrick, dressed in a crisp white shirt and sporting a neat haircut. His angular face carried a cheerful charm. I stared at him in silence for a few seconds before stumbling towards the restroom. Facing the mirror, I saw a face brimming with youth, splashing cold water repeatedly on my forehead. I couldn't ignore the glaring truth. My scars were gone. I had traveled 8 years back in time, to my freshman year in college. Today was my roommate Patrick's birthday. Apparently, I had downed a strong drink by mistake, passing out on the couch for quite some time. Still groggy, I stepped out of the restroom and bumped into someone. Before I could apologize, a familiar, melodious voice chimed. "Sorry, are you okay?" My brows furrowed instinctively. I looked up to see a petite woman with delicate features. She wore a fitted white silk blouse and a white pleated skirt that accentuated her lithe figure. It was Susanna. Our gazes locked for a moment, freezing time. Ignoring her hesitant expression, I shook my head and calmly said, "I'm fine." Brushing past her, back in the booth, I sank into the couch and cracked open a bottle of water. Just as I took a sip, Susanna entered the room. Patrick greeted her with a broad grin, throwing an arm around her shoulders as he introduced her. "This is my sister, Susanna. She's studying next door at C University." The flickering lights continued their chaotic dance as she gave us a modest smile and a slight nod. If I didn't count the accidental collision in the hallway, this was the scene of our first official meeting in my previous life. Susanna is Patrick's sister from another father and mother, the woman I loved and spent 6 years with. I discovered she didn't love me back the day Patrick got married. That night, I found her crying in her sleep, murmuring, "Patrick, Patrick." In that moment, my entire being felt hollow. It took me a long time to process the truth. It was Patrick. She loved Patrick, but back then, I loved her too much. So, under the night sky, I sat in silence until dawn, convincing myself to judge actions, not thoughts. It was just a dream. It didn't mean anything. The next day, I pretended nothing had happened and continued being with her, clinging to the words she once told me. "He's just my brother." Things changed when Patrick's marriage ended due to his wife's infidelity. I overheard him confessing to Susanna, holding her tightly. "Susanna, I never loved her. I've always loved you. Please, come back to me." He explained that his mother, with her fragile heart condition, had threatened him with her life, forcing him to fake his feelings for someone else and push Susanna towards me. I didn't know if his words were true, but Susanna believed him. She was moved to tears. That same night, she came to me. After a long, heavy silence, she finally stammered, "Alex, we should break up." Looking into her beautiful eyes, I didn't even have the strength to ask the obvious why. I was called away for an emergency surgery before I could process her words, suppressing all my emotions with reason and professionalism. I spent the next 8 hours in the operating room. When I finally stepped out, the first thing I saw was Susanna's post on her social media. "I wish I could go back 8 years and stop Patrick from marrying that horrible woman." Chapter 2. Having a second chance, I began noticing details I had either ignored or deliberately overlooked before. Like the birthday cake Susanna had personally made for Patrick. Like the way she playfully snatched his drink away as he downed glass after glass. Or how, at the end of the party, when a drunken Patrick swayed unsteadily to his feet, she instinctively supported his arm, carefully helping him walk. The other 2 roommates looked on with admiration, exclaiming, "The bond between these siblings is amazing." Back then, I really believed Susanna was just his cousin. So, when Patrick found someone he liked and started encouraging me to pursue Susanna, I genuinely fell for her radiant charm, gentle warmth, and thoughtfulness. It wasn't until the truth unraveled that I realized her kindness and affection were reserved for only one person. No matter how I celebrated her birthday or anniversaries, no matter what gifts I gave her, her reactions were always lukewarm. Yet, whenever Patrick was around, her attention was solely on him. From the very beginning, Susanna's heart had always belonged to Patrick. Just like now, after the party ended, I sat in the front passenger seat, Having called for a designated driver to take us home, Susanna had been pulled along and was now seated in the back with Patrick. Everyone was half asleep. In the rearview mirror, I saw Susanna gazing tenderly at Patrick, who was just as drunk and unconscious. A light breeze lifted a strand of hair by her ear. I stayed silent in the dim car, my expression unreadable. Through my barely open eyes, I watched Susanna raise her right hand towards Patrick, her voice soft and resolute. Patrick, this time, I won't let you marry someone else. My heart pounded violently in that moment. I closed my eyes and let the darkness consume me, fully aware of one undeniable fact. Susanna had also traveled back in time. She wouldn't let Patrick marry someone else, and I wouldn't let myself be with her again. Returning to the dormitory, I lay on my familiar yet unfamiliar bed. The ceiling fan hummed, blowing bursts of hot air as I rubbed my aching head and drifted into sleep. In my dreams, I was trapped in a loop, reliving the 8 years with Susanna, from the day we met to the day we broke up. Over and over again, I heard her say, "Alex, we should break up." A buzzing phone pulled me out of the nightmare. I opened my eyes and stared blankly for a moment before picking it up. A glance at my schedule jolted my memory. I had taken a part-time job tutoring English to a high school student. Checking the time, I quickly got out of bed, washed up, grabbed a random bag of bread, and took the bus to the student's house. Fortunately, I was teaching English. My medical career had kept me fluent, as I frequently read the latest academic research in the field. After reviewing the lesson materials, I had a good idea of what to cover. The student was a high school girl. After finishing the prepared lesson, I began checking an essay her teacher had assigned, a simple topic, me in 10 years. She rested her chin on her hand and asked, "Mr. Alex, do you think I can become a manga artist in 10 years? I replied confidently, "You absolutely can." She wouldn't need 10 years. In 8 years, she would become a wildly popular manga artist with a massive fan base. She then asked excitedly, "And you, Mr. Alex, will you have become a doctor by then?" "Yes," I said firmly. She nodded thoughtfully, then suddenly pointed outside the window, where a tall, slender figure walked under the shade of trees, holding a sky-blue umbrella. With certainty, she declared, "Then Miss Miriam must have become a biological researcher." Through the veil of rain, our eyes met, and for a brief moment, my mind went blank. Memories surged forward unbidden. She wouldn't have 10 years. In 2 years, she would lose her life in a car accident. Chapter 3. Her name was Miriam. She was the prized student of the renowned biology professor at C University and widely recognized as the belle of the department. Her beauty and intellect often earned her a spot on confession boards across universities, and she was frequently praised as the perfect combination of brains and charm. In my memories, our interactions had been minimal. We'd crossed paths a few times in the university library, but that was all. The day our lives truly intersected was also the day of our final goodbye. It was during my junior year, on the day I went to the hospital to visit Susanna, who was ill. On my way back to campus, I was crossing a green-lighted pedestrian crosswalk with a group of strangers when a speeding car ran a red light and charged toward us. Before I could react, a black Mercedes suddenly appeared, racing forward to intercept the oncoming car. The screeching sound of tires filled the air as both vehicles collided and crashed into a distant guardrail. Instinctively, I ran toward the scene, but before I got far, an explosion erupted. Flames consumed the wreckage, blocking my vision. The cicadas in the nearby camphor trees fell silent for a moment before resuming their deafening cries. No one inside the cars survived. Shrapnel grazed my forehead, leaving a scar. Later, the incident made headlines. The investigation revealed that the driver of the speeding car was a man who had lost everything to gambling and sought to take revenge on society. His car was loaded with gasoline. The other victim was Miriam. The car she drove belonged to her professor. That day, she had been running an errand for him, picking up documents from another university. She just happened to be on that road at the wrong time. Her personal details quickly surfaced online. Photos of her flooded the internet, accompanied by an outpouring of admiration for her beauty and talent, and grief for her untimely death. Among the comments, one stood out. "She saved so many families. In a way, she died with purpose." After all, she had no one of her own. Miriam had grown up without a father. Her mother passed away from illness the year she took her college entrance exams. She truly had no one to grieve deeply for her, no one to mourn her loss. Her unfinished research project was abruptly cut short. One time, when I brought flowers to visit her grave, I ran into her professor, a chubby, older man. He stood silently before her tombstone, only breaking the silence with a heavy sigh when a light rain began to fall. This girl had such a bright future ahead of her, he lamented. For a long time afterward, I struggled with insomnia. My heart felt submerged in water, heavy and aching. Perhaps it was guilt or regret. A light tug on my sleeve snapped me out of my thoughts. Miriam was no longer visible outside the window, and the student beside me was speaking again. "Mr. Alex, I'm off to Miriam's biology class now. Don't forget what I said earlier, don't be late tomorrow night. I hadn't actually heard what she'd said earlier, but a distant memory from my previous life reminded me, tomorrow was her birthday. Her parents were too busy to celebrate with her, so she had asked me to keep her company. The rain outside had stopped at some point. A warm beam of sunlight pierced through the clouds, and I suddenly remembered something I'd read online after Miriam's death. Tomorrow was her birthday. Chapter 4. But Miriam never celebrated her birthday. The day she was born was also the day her firefighter father died in a blaze while on duty. He never got to see her. I doubted she wanted to hear happy birthday, but it was still the day she entered this world, and no one should spend that day alone. So, the next day, I arrived at the student's house early, carrying a cake and a gift. Miriam was giving a lesson. The setting sun outside cast a warm glow. She wore a simple white dress and stood by the wooden table, holding a test paper. Her gaze was lowered as she read, serene and elegant. Seeing her like that, an image from my past life surfaced in my mind, a screenshot of a chat that I'd stumbled upon. Its authenticity was unknown, but the exchange was brief. Someone had asked her, "Miriam, do you like someone?" "Yes," she replied. "Then tell him." 3 minutes passed before her next response appeared. "Never mind." Most people didn't believe that someone like Miriam, the department belle, would have a secret crush, but by then, she was gone, and the truth would remain forever hidden. Even if it was real, her unspoken feelings would never see the light of day. Her absent father, her sick mother who passed away, her untold crush, her interrupted career, her unnoticed sacrifice. Her life was filled with regrets, broken and incomplete. The prodigy of the biology department deserved a better ending. By the time the lesson ended, night had fully fallen. The student ran excitedly toward me, hugging the set of art supplies I had bought for her. She sighed wistfully. If only Miriam could join us. The three of us would have had so much fun. I hesitated for a moment, then looked up at Miriam as she packed her materials and prepared to leave. Without thinking, I called out, "Miriam, why don't you?" Before I could finish, the city was plunged into a sudden blackout. Darkness swallowed everything. I cleared my throat, steadied my voice, and lied. "Miriam, why don't you stay here? It's pitch black outside. It's not safe for a woman to be out alone." For a moment, silence hung in the air. The faint scent of her perfume drifted closer. I struck a match, cupping the small flame in my hand. The light cast a golden glow over her features. Her gaze soft as she looked at me and said quietly, "Okay." Under the flickering candlelight, I brought out the cake and placed it in front of us. As the flames danced, I spoke with sincerity. "Today we celebrate the continuation of life. From now on, may it be safe and happy." No one wished more than I did for her to live a safe and happy life. In the dimly lit room, we divided the cake. The sweet aroma filled the air as the student rushed to grab her grade report, grinning widely. "Mr. Alex, my mom said I've improved a lot this time. She wants to treat you both to dinner as a thank you." Looking at the grades, a memory surfaced. In my previous life, this event had indeed happened. But that time, Patrick had asked me to help him move props for a photo shoot, so I had politely declined the dinner invitation. This time, my gaze shifted to Miriam, seated in the soft glow of the candlelight. I realized something. In the previous life, I was supposed to meet her at that dinner. Chapter 5. In the end, I didn't make it to the dinner. On the way, I injured my leg saving a child from being hit by a car and ended up in the hospital. To prove I wasn't just flaking, I even took a picture of my bandaged leg and sent it to the student's parent. The injury wasn't serious, just a mild scrape, so hospitalization wasn't necessary. While waiting for the doctor to clean the wound, I absent-mindedly scrolled through my phone and saw Patrick's latest social media post. It was from an event hosted by their photography club, and of course, Susanna was in the pictures. Where Patrick went, Susanna was sure to follow. I still remembered the day of our 4-year anniversary. Patrick's girlfriend had decided to break up with him, and he had gotten drunk at a bar. His voice, laced with misery, begged over the phone, "Susanna, I'm in so much pain. Can you come and keep me company?" At the time, we had just arrived at the restaurant I'd reserved. We hadn't even ordered yet when Susanna stood up, ready to leave. I offered to come with her, but she stopped me with an excuse. "Alex, Patrick has always been proud. He wouldn't want you to see him in this state." "And you?" I asked. "We grew up together." "It's different," she replied. Not long after Patrick reconciled with his girlfriend, during a party, someone teased him about being a simp, claiming he'd always go crawling back to her. Drunk and angry, Patrick retorted, "Crawl back to her? Don't be ridiculous. There are plenty of women who like me. I can replace her anytime." Susanna was right there, lowering her head in silent humiliation. She must have always known. Patrick was well aware of her feelings but pretended not to notice, allowing himself to enjoy the ambiguous relationship without any responsibility. As for me, Susanna's simple excuse, "He's my brother, and your friend," was enough to dismiss any protest I might have had. Thankfully, in this second chance, I was determined not to be their tool. After getting my wound treated, I hobbled out of the hospital. It started raining halfway home, and my injury couldn't get wet. Enduring the pain, I found shelter under a nearby building and prepared to call for a ride. But, as fate would have it, my phone had died. The late summer breeze carried a slight chill, and just as I was resigning myself to waiting for the rain to stop, Miriam appeared. She held her signature sky blue umbrella, running toward me with urgency. Raindrops splashed around her feet, soaking the hem of her dress, but she didn't seem to care. When she realized I'd noticed her, she slowed her pace and tried to act composed. Without saying a word, she handed me the umbrella, quickly pulling out a waterproof patch from her bag. Gently lifting my pant leg to expose the bandaged wound, she carefully applied the patch with swift yet delicate movements. Supporting my arm, she said softly, "The roads are narrow here. It's hard to get a ride. Let's move to a better spot." A little taken aback, I held the umbrella while she helped me walk. The faint scent of gardenia surrounded her. Her hurried breaths filled the air as my gaze traced the curve of her shoulders, settling on her focused expression. Once we got into a car, I asked why she had come. Her answer was natural. The student's mom was worried but had a meeting she couldn't miss, so she asked me to check on you when your phone was off. I had to search everywhere to find you. The air inside the car was damp and a little stuffy, likely due to the rain. I cracked the window slightly, unable to imagine how many places she'd searched for me. As fatigue set in, I eventually dozed off. When I woke up, the rain had stopped, and we had arrived at the campus gate. Miriam carefully helped me out of the car. Before leaving, I thanked her. With a small smile and lowered gaze, she replied, "You're welcome, Mr. Alex." Back in the dorm, I realized I was still holding her sky blue umbrella. Chapter 6. By the time I went to return the umbrella to C University, autumn had arrived. My injured leg required rest, and the constant rain had kept me from leaving campus. On a sunny weekend, I impulsively decided to find Miriam, not realizing how reckless I was to come without any idea of her whereabouts. Searching for her on a sprawling campus was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Unsurprisingly, I didn't find Miriam. Instead, I stumbled upon Susanna. Passing by the tennis courts, I heard someone shout amidst the chaos, "Call an ambulance." She fainted. Years of medical training kicked in. I instinctively ran over, pushed through the crowd, and knelt beside the unconscious girl to perform CPR. After about 15 minutes, she regained consciousness. Just as the campus nurse arrived, as I stood up to leave, I noticed Susanna standing in the crowd, staring at me. Dressed in a white pleated tennis skirt, she looked out of place. I met her gaze briefly before turning away, picking up the umbrella, and walking off. Behind me, I heard someone ask, "Susanna, do you know him?" "No," she replied. I found a nearby cafe to rest and regain my strength. The occasional tinkling of the door's wind chime punctuated the quiet atmosphere as I absent-mindedly played chess on my phone. The chime rang again, and a shadow fell across the table. Looking up, I saw Miriam. The sound of a failed game buzzed from my phone as I smiled, surprised. What a coincidence. Her lips curved into a soft smile. "Not a coincidence. I came to find you." She placed her phone on the table, showing me a university confession page. The post featured a photo of me performing CPR on the tennis court, with the caption, "In 3 minutes, I need to know everything about this man." The post, barely half an hour old, already had hundreds of comments. Most were just joking around, but a few offered plausible theories. "Judging by his CPR technique, he's probably from the med school. What's he doing at our university? The umbrella looks like a girl's. Is it his girlfriend's?" Some even speculated Miriam might be the girlfriend. I quickly looked away from the screen, feeling awkward. Picking up the umbrella, I handed it to her. I hadn't had a chance to return this yet. That evening, when I returned to the dorm, my gossip-hungry roommate shoved his phone in my face. On the confession page, a new post had gone viral. "Case solved, Miriam from the biology department is his girlfriend." Attached was a photo of me handing the umbrella to Miriam in the cafe, overlaid with a soft pink filter that gave the scene a romantic vibe. Under pressure from my curious roommate, I explained the entire situation. After hearing the story, he sighed in disappointment but tried to console me. "Still, you might have a shot. Why not go for it?" Looking at Miriam's contact in my phone, her simple nickname stared back at me, Miriam. Her profile picture was a pure white paper crane. After some thought, I changed her nickname to Mimi Teacher. Chapter 7. Her social media was pristine, with only a single post. "The wind has risen." The timestamp, the day we first met. For some reason, the memory of another timeline came flooding back. 6 years after her death, on her anniversary, the rain had just cleared. The twilight sky glowed with warm hues as I brought flowers to visit her grave. The shadow of my figure stretched across her tombstone. I stood silently, gazing at the gray and white photograph of her serene and elegant face. Then, as if on cue, the wind stirred. The grass in the cemetery swayed lightly, and the leaves whispered as they collided. A few leaves floated down, landing on my shoulders, a sign, perhaps, of fate turning the page to a new chapter. Then, time rewound, and I was returned to the past. We met again. This time, I was relieved to return before meeting Susanna. Instead of wasting energy plotting revenge, I was determined to be nothing more than a stranger to her. Just as she had said on the tennis court, I don't know him. Freshman year passed in a blur of chaos and haste. If memory served, the new batch of C University students would include the girl Patrick would fall for. She was Susanna's junior by a year. In the previous timeline, Patrick met her at a party. He fell for her, and his efforts to orchestrate encounters between me and Susanna intensified. Eventually, through his constant meddling, Susanna agreed to date me. Now, with Susanna also back in time, I assumed she would prevent Patrick from meeting that girl and ultimately end up with him herself. Or so I thought. But fate always has a flair for drama. During the final exam of the semester, I sat behind and to the right of Patrick. I had just finished my paper and was about to hand it in when Patrick, who had been dozing off on his desk, suddenly jolted awake. Grabbing his test sheet, he scanned it briefly, then looked around wildly. Clutching the arm of the bewildered student beside him, he exclaimed, "What year is it? Tell me what year it is." I watched him silently for a moment, then stood up and left the exam hall. Outside, Susanna was waiting for him. As I walked past, she called out to me. I stopped and turned to see her staring at me, her expression unreadable. "Are you with her now?" she asked. I wasn't sure what she was trying to imply, so I simply replied, "What does it matter to you?" The semester ended, and I didn't see her again for a while. I had thought that with a second chance, Susanna and Patrick would find mutual happiness, but things didn't turn out that way. Patrick still didn't choose Susanna. Even with a chance to rewrite his past, he fell for Susanna's junior once again. His confession after his divorce in the original timeline had been nothing more than a lie. This time, Patrick didn't try to push Susanna and me together. Instead, he tried to set her up with Domingo, the man who would later have an affair with his wife. I didn't know what had transpired over the break, but when I returned, Patrick and Domingo had become close friends. One evening, as I walked back to the dorm with a book in hand, I saw Patrick and Susanna talking under the streetlights. Without slowing down, I passed them, only to catch their conversation. "Patrick, Domingo is a scumbag. Why don't you believe me? Why would you introduce us? I can't stand him." Susanna's voice was filled with frustration. Patrick replied with calm persuasion, "Susanna, trust me, you just don't know him well yet. He's a great guy. Just give him a chance, for me." Okay. Chapter 8. Patrick announced his relationship 2 months later. That weekend, I attended a party and ran into a heavily drunk Susanna. In the dim hallway outside the private room, I was on my way back from the restroom when she suddenly lunged at me, wrapping her arms tightly around me. I shoved her off, but she clung to my arm again, refusing to let go. Tears streamed down her face as she choked out, "Patrick, why are you with that awful woman? You must have been forced into it. You love me, don't you? I know you love me." Her grip tightened, and just as I was about to kick her away, her hand was abruptly torn off me. The sound of a slap echoed in the hallway. Susanna staggered backward, her face now marked with a vivid red handprint. It was Miriam. She had been attending a group celebration nearby and had stepped out for some air, only to stumble upon this scene. Susanna, clutching her stinging cheek, finally seemed to sober up a little. Leaning against the wall, she looked at me with a frown. "Alex." There was nothing more to say. I grabbed Miriam's hand and turned to leave. Behind us, Susanna sneered, "You must feel pretty smug, don't you, Alex? I know you like me. Seeing me fail to end up with Patrick must be so satisfying for you," she continued, venom in her voice. "So what if you're with her? She's just a ticking time bomb, a dying woman." I stopped dead in my tracks. Susanna had crossed the line. She could insult me all she wanted, but she had no right to say that about Miriam. I turned around and slapped her across the other cheek. "Shut your mouth, Susanna," I said coldly. "She's not going to die, because I'm here now. I couldn't go back and save her father from dying in that fire. I couldn't go back and save her mother from succumbing to illness, but I could save her now." As we left the hotel, the blaring horn of a passing car jolted me from my thoughts. That's when I realized I was still holding Miriam's hand. Her palm was slightly warm and damp. Startled, I quickly let go and scratched my head awkwardly. "Sorry, I forgot. And, thanks for earlier." She clutched the hem of her skirt tightly, her gaze steady as she asked about what she said. My heart skipped a beat, and I interrupted her hastily. She was drunk and rambling. "Don't believe a word of it, Miriam. You have a bright future ahead of you. A long, long future." She smiled faintly, then asked, "And you, Alex, you'll become an excellent doctor, won't you?" I met her gaze and nodded firmly. "As long as I'm alive, I'll do my best to heal and save lives." Chapter 9. Patrick ultimately failed to set Susanna up with Domingo. Yet Domingo, seemingly undeterred, grew infatuated with her, refusing to leave her alone. In some twisted sense, Patrick's objective was fulfilled. Domingo likely wouldn't be the reason for his wife's infidelity in this timeline. What Patrick failed to anticipate, however, was that Susanna had also traveled back in time. Like a drowning person clutching at a lifeline, Susanna stubbornly clung to the lie Patrick had told her in the previous timeline. That lie, however cruel, had become her only oxygen, sustaining a desperate, suffocating love. In the end, it was Patrick himself who shattered that illusion. It happened at a party I wasn't present for. When my roommates returned to the dorm that night, their expressions were complicated as they recounted the scene to me. Patrick got drunk and punched Domingo. Nobody could hold him back. He kept yelling that Domingo had cuckolded him. The more his girlfriend tried to calm him down, the angrier he got. But what's weird, the other added, is that Susanna just stood there smiling, watching her brother lose his mind. I froze for a moment, caught off guard, but said nothing. That wasn't peace on Susanna's face, it was resignation. She had realized the truth. Patrick had also traveled back in time. Not only did he refuse to choose her, but he had also treated her like a pawn, even going so far as to push her toward Domingo. To Patrick, Susanna had always been a joke. After that, I didn't see Susanna seeking Patrick out anymore, not that he seemed to care. I crossed paths with Susanna a few times at C University when visiting Miriam. One incident stood out vividly. Miriam and I were eating at a newly opened restaurant near campus. On the way back, we passed an outdoor barbecue stand, where a commotion caught our attention. A thug was harassing a group of students, loudly taunting. "So you're the one refusing to be our boss, Domingo's girlfriend. He's been chasing you for days, and you think you're some kind of goddess, a piece of trash like you." Before he could finish, one of Susanna's male classmates stood up and punched him square in the face. The scene descended into chaos. Shouts, screams, and the sound of shattering glass filled the air. Amid the turmoil, a broken beer bottle flew straight toward Miriam. Acting on instinct, I pulled her into my arms. The shard grazed my cheek, leaving a thin, bloody cut. "Alex," she cried out in alarm. I quickly ushered her into a nearby dumpling shop, reassuring her. "It's okay, don't be scared." The commotion outside had subsided by the time the police arrived. Miriam gently cleaned my wound with bottled water and pulled out a cartoonish green bandage from her pocket. As she leaned in to carefully apply it to my cheek, Susanna entered the shop. She was accompanied by a few others from the fight, all with varying degrees of injuries. Miriam ignored them, continuing to tend to my wound. Suddenly, Susanna kicked a chair and yelled, "So noisy." The next day, as snow softly fell, Susanna intercepted me on campus. Dried blood still clung to her lips, and her gaze was a mix of emotions. "Alex," she began, "you two won't work out. It's my advice to you, don't be with her." Her words chilled me, and I turned away with a cold reply. "I'm not a psychiatrist. If you're mentally ill, don't come looking for me." Behind me, her mocking laugh echoed. "Alex, you should have been in love with me." Chapter 10. In this lifetime, I had lived a peaceful, steady life, with only one disaster, Susanna and Patrick, who wasted 6 years of my time. Miriam, however, was the person I owed a life to. When I first returned to the past, I thought my purpose was to undo the mistake of being with Susanna, but it wasn't. One afternoon, near the end of sophomore year, I was startled awake from a nap by a nightmare. In the dream, I was back at that crosswalk. As the crowd and I crossed the street, a speeding car barreled toward us. I watched helplessly as the black Mercedes intervened, the explosion following soon after. The old ceiling fan overhead spun noisily as I stared blankly at the ceiling, a cold realization dawning on me. I always knew this was an unsolvable problem. Beyond knowing the driver's motive, revenge against society, I had no information about him. I could save Miriam. I could avoid that intersection altogether. But what about the elderly, the children, the pregnant women, and the students who would still be there? Once, in desperation, I went to the police, clinging to a one-in-a-million hope. Their response was dismissive. "Have you been watching too many sci-fi movies? We solve cases with science, not pseudoscience." In early June, as high school entrance exams loomed, both Miriam and I finished our tutoring jobs. By then, I had known her for almost 2 years. She had never mentioned any special someone, nor had I seen anyone close to her. I was convinced that the screenshot of her secret crush was fake. If it were real, the thought that she died without ever confessing was heartbreaking. I had often imagined the kind of man she might like, perhaps someone sunny and handsome, or talented and outstanding, someone as extraordinary as her. But no matter the type, he would undoubtedly be exceptional. One evening, after a dinner invitation from the students' parents, Miriam and I walked through a moonlit alleyway. Perhaps it was the melancholy of knowing we'd part ways at the end of the road, or maybe the night itself stirred old feelings. Passing under a dim street lamp, I casually asked, "Miriam, do you like anyone?" She paused for a long moment before replying with a question of her own. Why do you ask? I shrugged, pretending nonchalance. If you do, you should tell them. Life's too short for regrets. We stopped at the intersection. She turned to me and said, with surprising seriousness, "Thank you, Alex." I assumed she was thanking me for the advice and thought nothing of it. On the eve of the day Miriam died in the previous timeline, her professor asked her to drive and retrieve some documents the next day. This time, I intervened. I casually suggested she go in the afternoon instead, mentioning that a friend had given me 2 movie tickets for the morning. To my surprise, she agreed. The movie was about time travel, a man going back to fix his mistakes only to realize it was all a dream. Halfway through, I excused myself, claiming I needed the restroom. It was an ordinary moment, just like any other day. Outside the theater, I got into a rented car and drove to that intersection, realizing along the way, our meeting was always destined to end in separation. Miriam, this time, I'll let you see the future world. As I stood at the intersection, waiting for the car to appear, an explosion suddenly erupted nearby. My heart seized. I bolted toward the scene, phone in hand, frantically dialing Miriam's number. No one answered. Standing before the burning wreckage, my vision blurred as tears welled up. The dizziness hit me like a wave, and the last thing I remembered was the haunting realization. I still hadn't saved her. Chapter 11. I woke up in a hospital room, the familiar scent of disinfectant lingering in the air, the phone on the bedside table, the white coat hanging nearby, and the familiar faces of the nurses. All of it told me one thing. I had traveled back again. This was 8 years later. The nurse told me I had been unconscious for about 20 minutes. I stared at the fluttering curtains, momentarily unable to distinguish whether I had dreamed of the past or was dreaming of the present. It wasn't until I splashed cold water on my face in the restroom and noticed that the scar on my forehead was gone that I realized it was real. I had truly traveled back. With trembling fingers, I opened my phone's browser and quickly searched for any mention of that fateful car accident. I found only a brief, obscure report from long ago. No trending news, no mention of Miriam, no grave. I began asking people around me, probing whether they remembered the car accident from 6 years ago, or the brave college student who had sacrificed herself to save others. The responses were always the same. Alex, are you sure you're not misremembering? I think there was an accident, but it didn't trend or anything. I don't know. 6 years ago is such a long time. Maybe I didn't notice, or I forgot. Miriam had no family, and her former classmates had scattered to different parts of the world. I could only think of going to her university to find her professor, but even he had left the country. I couldn't find any trace of Miriam, any person or evidence tied to her existence. The only proof I had that she was real, that we had ever crossed paths, was in my phone. In our last conversation, the final message she sent was 6 years ago, on the eve of the accident. Sure, let's watch a movie tomorrow. For 6 years, the thread of our chat remained silent. I deleted and rewrote countless messages, but I never sent anything. As long as I didn't confirm it, I could believe she was still alive. I started walking around C University whenever I had free time, often wandering aimlessly to the lake where we used to go. Miriam's lab was on the ground floor nearby. Sometimes, through the clear glass windows, I thought I caught a glimpse of her slim figure in a white lab coat, bent over a desk, jotting down notes, but when I blinked, the vision would vanish. Susanna sought me out on the second day after my return. She pleaded with me, saying she didn't really want to break up and was just throwing a tantrum that day. I paused my work, looked up at her, and calmly asked, "Susanna, were we ever together?" Her face turned pale as the blood drained from it. The truth was, she had no proof. The 6 years of our relationship, like Miriam's sacrifice, had vanished in this timeline. Fate had rewound the clock for the 4 of us, back to 8 years earlier. Susanna, determined to change Patrick's fate of marrying someone else, had reshaped our relationship in her pursuit of him. While she ultimately realized she had been nothing more than a pawn, she and I were no longer connected. Desperately, she tried to find evidence of our 6-year relationship, but it was futile. There were no shared photos, no mutual friends, no surveillance footage. Time passed, and my colleagues, who once gossiped about Susanna, began to pity her. Such a pretty girl, what a shame she's lost her mind. I smiled and gently told her one day, "The psych ward is to your left, maybe check it out." Patrick, too, wasn't spared. Though he had avoided Domingo's involvement with his wife, people who cheat will always find a way to cheat. During the time Susanna was fixated on proving our past, she was also dealing with Domingo's obsessive advances and Patrick's relentless pleas. Patrick, desperate to convince Susanna of his love and circumstances, grew more erratic. Eventually, even Susanna lost her patience. One day, while retrieving some documents from the pathology department, I saw Susanna from a distance. She was sobbing, clutching papers in her hands, yelling at 3 people in front of her. I didn't stay to listen and walked away. Later, I learned from colleagues that Susanna had overheard Patrick's mother confessing the truth. Through a DNA test, it was revealed that Patrick and Susanna were half-siblings, sharing the same father. In mid-May, I was invited to deliver a lecture on first aid techniques at a university. The lecture hall was packed, and as the event ended, I gathered my materials and prepared to leave. As I scanned the dispersing crowd, a familiar figure caught my eye, but before I could focus, she was gone. Outside, the evening sky was dark, and a fine drizzle began to fall. I hesitated, holding my folder above my head as makeshift protection. Just as I prepared to dash into the rain, a blue umbrella appeared beside me. The familiar scent of gardenias wafted in. Droplets slid down the tilted surface of the umbrella as my heart skipped a beat. Slowly, I turned my head. There she was, Miriam. Her features were as gentle and refined as I remembered. 6 years had passed, but she remained unchanged, as though time itself had bent to preserve her. Miriam, I whispered, voice trembling. Chapter 12. After the car accident explosion, Miriam was taken abroad for treatment by her professor and remained in a coma for about 2 years. When she woke up, she stayed abroad for therapy and studies. It wasn't until now, 6 years later, that she returned home, joined a research institute, and became a biology professor at the university. This was her concise summary of 6 years of life. I blinked. The thousands of words I wanted to say in the moment condensed into just 2. That's wonderful. It was wonderful that she was alive. The former MSU was now Professor Miriam. I heard that her lectures were so popular among male students that many had to stand just to attend. Curious, I decided to check it out for myself. But unfortunately, she had swapped her class with another teacher. When an elderly man walked into the classroom, a wave of groans erupted from the male students, who left in droves. Feeling conflicted as I watched the old man's dejected expression, I hesitated before deciding to stay. I sent Miriam a text. Do you have class today? The next moment, a low voice spoke behind me. No, I don't. Turning around, I saw that familiar, stunning face. Miriam was dressed in a white knitted dress. Her hair was pinned up, and she wore a pair of fine-framed glasses. No wonder no one recognized her. Startled, I was about to ask why she was here when she shyly pointed at my phone. It was a text from her. I saw you enter this classroom and was curious about what course could interest Dr. Alex enough to attend in person. She smiled lightly, her tone faintly teasing. Turns out it was my class. I was speechless. Over the 6 years, Miriam's personality seemed to have shifted. She was still distant and composed, but now with a certain restraint that wasn't there before. From that moment on, my relationship with Miriam resumed its dynamics from 6 years ago, but with an unspoken difference. I decided to visit her on campus to express my feelings. However, I inadvertently overheard a conversation. It sounded like one of her colleagues, lamenting over love troubles. Miriam, how can I make him realize I like him? You wouldn't understand the pain. Someone like you doesn't have these kinds of worries. Miriam didn't respond. The colleague pressed further. Come on, be honest. You've rejected so many people. Do you already have someone you like? Holding my breath, I heard her softly hum in acknowledgement. Chapter 13. I admit it, I like Miriam. As for when my feelings of wanting to make amends transformed into love, I can't trace it back, but if she already has someone she likes, I shouldn't become an obstacle in her path to happiness. Previously, I thought rumors of her having a secret crush were baseless. Now, it seems they were true, so I kept my distance and stopped replying to her messages. 3 days later, she appeared in my consultation room. Frustrated, I told her, Miriam, you don't have to come here every day. Her expression was serious as she replied, Doctor, I booked an appointment and waited my turn. What I mean is, you don't need to keep coming for minor issues. She bit her lip and hesitated. Then she admitted shyly, actually, I'm not here for medical reasons. Before she could finish, a man stormed into the consultation room brandishing a knife. I recognized him instantly. He was the man whose wife had taken her own life after enduring his abuse. He blamed the hospital for failing to save her. Pointing the knife at me, he roared, You killed my wife. In the chaos that followed, I subdued the man, but Miriam got injured in the process. Standing by her hospital bed, looking at her pale face, I sighed heavily. The words I had planned to say condensed into just 3. I'm so sorry. After taking care of her for half a month, I drove her home and suggested gently, maybe I should hire you a housekeeper instead. Her fingers paused mid-typing on her phone. Turning to me, she asked, why would that be inconvenient? The car fell into silence. Wind blew through the window, making her hair flutter and sending ripples through my otherwise calm heart. I gripped the steering wheel tightly and kept my eyes on the road, saying nothing more. In the end, she refused to let a stranger into her home, so I took on the responsibility. She didn't need much care, though. I would prepare lunch before work, eat breakfast with her, then return in the evening to share dinner. As time passed, an odd feeling began to stir within me. One evening, I had to attend a colleague's birthday party. I called her to let her know I'd be late. When I arrived home, a sour smell greeted me. Miriam was at the dining table, poking at her food. "What are you eating?" I asked. She looked at me with a straight face and replied, "Can't you tell? I'm eating vinegar." Speechless, I glanced at her plate. It was a dumpling takeout with a dish of vinegar filled to the brim. I cooked her a bowl of noodles, opened the windows to air out the smell, and reminded her, "Don't eat like that again. The vinegar's too strong." She lowered her eyes, silently eating the noodles. That night, the atmosphere between us was heavy. After running her a warm bath, I turned to warn her not to get her wound wet but accidentally bumped into her. She slipped, and I caught her just in time. My heart pounded violently, and I couldn't tell whether it was hers or mine. She looked up at me, her eyes like the first blossoms of spring, mesmerizing. In the misty bathroom, with her body so close to mine, a fire ignited between us. I blurted out, "Miriam, I need to confess something." She bit her lip, her voice trembling. "What is it?" "I have feelings for you," I said, my voice steady. Her cheeks flushed, and she admitted, "I was actually going to confess to someone at the hospital that day." My breath hitched. I grabbed her waist and pressed her against the sink. Sometimes, treating a patient requires finding the root cause. It takes multiple sessions and the right dose of medication, sometimes harsh, sometimes gentle, but when the timing is right, even the most stubborn wounds can heal. Chapter 14. Shortly after Miriam and I started dating, I brought up a question that had been bothering me for a long time. "Why didn't you contact me at all during those 6 years abroad?" At the time, she was nibbling on the pineapple pastries I bought her. Upon hearing my question, she suddenly leaned into my arms. The faint scent of gardenias lingered in the air as she spoke in a pitiful voice. I was scared. Before I could respond, she continued, "I was afraid of becoming a burden, afraid that I wouldn't deserve you anymore. I was afraid that if I reached out, I'd start wanting more, and I was terrified that you might already have someone else you loved." In the silence that followed, a pang of bitterness rose within me. My chest tightened, and my eyes stung. Hugging her tightly, I whispered with conviction, "Miriam, I promise I'll treat you well from now on and make it up to you." For a moment, she was silent. Then, her hand slipped down my shirt. She chuckled softly, her voice teasing, "Not later. I want you to make it up to me now. It's time for you to hand in your assignment." I was speechless. The tender atmosphere was instantly shattered. After that, I dedicated myself fully to making it up to her in every possible way. The first time Miriam brought me to meet her parents was half a year into our relationship. I wasn't expecting to find myself standing in front of a gravestone. The photo on the tombstone was of a beautiful, gentle woman. Though her final days were consumed by illness, I was startled. I had been there when she passed away. My father was her attending physician. In my senior year of high school, whenever I visited my dad at the hospital, I often saw this woman. If my dad wasn't in his office, I'd wait for him in her room instead. Over time, we got to know each other. I would cut fruit for her, fold paper cranes, and chat with her. She passed away just before my college entrance exams. That was my first close encounter with terminal illness and death. It helped me understand why my parents were so preoccupied with their work at the hospital. That's also why I chose to major in medicine, a field I had previously disliked. Back then, I naively thought cancer was the only disease beyond cure. I wanted to find a solution. But after studying medicine, I learned that very few illnesses are truly curable. I never expected that this woman was Miriam's mother. On the way home, I leaned against the car window, watching the passing scenery. In a low voice, I said, "Miriam, actually, I met your mom a long time ago." She replied calmly, "I know." Something in her tone made me pause. I wondered if she had seen me back then. I ran into Susanna again 6 months later. On a quiet evening, Miriam had texted me, saying, "I'll be there in 10 minutes. I changed out of my work clothes and headed for the elevator. That's when I saw Susanna, her face pale. The two of us were alone. The silence stretched as the elevator descended. When it reached the first floor, I stepped out, only to feel my arm being grabbed. She looked up at me and asked, "Alex, can we talk?" Pulling my arm free, I said coldly, "Susanna, let's not waste each other's time." She seemed to anticipate my response. With a self-deprecating laugh, she said, "You might not believe me, but in another timeline, we were together for 6 years." I turned to leave without replying. Behind me, her voice lowered. "Too bad I didn't treat you well and ended up losing you." My steps faltered for a brief moment before I continued walking. Outside, near the flower beds, Miriam was waiting for me. Bathed in the warm hues of the setting sun, she looked radiant. I suddenly remembered an earlier incident when a parent of one of my students invited us to dinner. I had arrived early to thank her for visiting me in the hospital after I was injured. Surprised, the parent said, "I never asked Miriam to visit you. I only mentioned why you weren't there." And then she said she had something to do at school. The memory faded as I took Miriam's hand. Gently, I tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. She wrapped her arms around my arm, leaning lightly against me. "It's getting windy," I said, looking at her with a smile. Miriam's perspective. The internet wasn't wrong, I was just one person. and better me than countless families being destroyed. But I'm not that noble. Self-preservation is human nature. Still, if the life saved was someone I cared about, I'd gladly trade my life for theirs. After the explosion, when I regained consciousness, I found myself trapped in a cemetery. At first, on the anniversary of my death, the people I saved and some strangers came to visit. I often heard words of gratitude and praise, saying my sacrifice was meaningful. Over time, though, only Alex kept coming. He rarely spoke, usually just placing flowers before my tombstone, tidying the surrounding area, and sitting quietly for a while. The first time I heard him speak was on the 4th anniversary of my death. By then, no one else visited. Amidst the misty drizzle, he stood in front of my tombstone, gazing at my photo as he solemnly promised, "Miriam, don't worry, I won't forget you." That was the first time he called me by name. I never expected to meet him in death, but if given the chance, I'd still make the same choice. So, when I unexpectedly returned to the past, 8 years before my death, I chose the same ending for myself. I knew Alex had also returned. I knew his approach was driven by guilt and a desire to make amends. But that was enough. It was better than not knowing him at all. The years I spent alone felt unbearably long. Yet, the 2 years I knew him made time feel fleeting. If I couldn't be his lover, then being someone he could never forget wasn't so bad. I didn't remember the face of the man responsible for the crash or his license plate, but I vividly recalled him tossing beer cans out the window just before the intersection. When I accelerated and blocked his path, an irrelevant thought popped into my head, about a movie I never got to finish. I guess I'll never know how it ends. That late spring, I took leave from school to visit my mother at the hospital. The room was quiet. She was still asleep. I moved to the other side of the bed to read, only to notice a plate of sliced fruit and a pure white paper crane on the bedside table. Pausing in surprise, I watched as my mother woke up and smiled gently. "Alex left those for me," she said warmly.